Okay, good evening everyone. Welcome to this Asia Trends lecture on why India and China, historical significance and contemporary relevance, which will be delivered by Prof. 𝗵𝗵𝗀. My name's 𝗵𝗵𝗀. I'm Director of the National University of Singapore's Asia Research Institute, which over the last 2 decades has regularly held Asia Trends events on themes which are of public as well as academic interest. In order to be able to reach a more than academic audience, it makes sense to hold these kinds of events off campus, and it's really nice to be back here at the Asian Civilizations Museum. I really am loud. And very good to be able to see you all here this evening, even if you're not hearing me very well. You can hear me now, though, right? Yeah, good, I'm not talking to myself. Now, this is usually the kind of moment or occasion when I take the opportunity to vaunt at length the credentials and standing of ARI, the Asia Research Institute, as one of the world's leading centres for humanities and social sciences research on Asia. But my welcome remarks time this evening is limited, and so I'm going to limit myself to noting much more specifically that this evening's Asia Trends event forms part of the recently launched Nalanda Professorship in India-China Studies. That new professorship at ARI, in collaboration with the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy, emerges from a decision by trustees of the Nalanda Library Fund Limited to repurpose funds originally collected as a Singapore contribution to development of a library at Nalanda University in India into an endowment to advance scholarly research, education, and exchange on India and China's interconnections, historical, present day, and into the future. As an intercivilizational as well as geopolitical frame of analysis, which is not only of interest to scholars, but of clear worldly importance, not least in terms of prospects for regional peace and prosperity. So my thanks again to trustees of the Nalanda Library Fund, and especially to Mr. 𝗓𝗏, who is here again this evening. And what better way to kick off the Nalanda Professorship in India-China Studies than a lecture by Professor 𝗵𝗵𝗀 from NYU Shanghai and New York University. Not only has Professor Sen conducted historical research on that inter-Asia nexus, but he's also someone who sought to sketch possibilities for the field in general. I'll let my colleague 𝗵𝗲𝗀 give a more thorough introduction to Prof. Sen and also to Associate Professor Selina Ho and Dr. Ronojoy Sen, who have kindly agreed to provide comments as discussants. For now, thank you to all of you, and of course especially to Prof. 𝗵𝗵𝗀 in advance for your much anticipated lecture. Of course, however, it would be remiss of me not also to thank everyone who's contributed to the organizational side of this lecture, the events team at the Asia Research Institute, and especially Ms. Valerie, and supportive colleagues here at the ACM too, Angelina Tan and Clement On. Thank you. Thanks everyone for coming, and welcome again. Thanks.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming this evening. My name is 𝗵𝗲𝗀. I'm the Deputy Director at the Asia Research Institute and also a faculty member at the Department of History and Southeast Asian Studies. I'll be the moderator for this evening, so I'll be giving you, in a sense, the layout of the evening. We're going to have the great talk from 𝗵𝗵𝗀. We're going to have a panel, and we'll have enough time for you in the audience to participate. And this is really what we're very excited about, is to have a chance to connect with you all, both colleagues and friends, but also members of the public who are interested in India and China. I also don't want to take the opportunity to introduce our speakers a little bit more in detail, because we won't have a chance to otherwise. 𝗵𝗵𝗀 is an old friend of NUS and Singapore in general. It's lovely to have him back here. As Tim said, he's a professor of history at NYU Shanghai. He's the director of the Center for Global Asia, and he's written quite a lot on this topic. And You're going to see a bit of all of that tonight in his presentation. He has written, for instance, on a book on Buddhist diplomacy and trade, the realignment of Sino-India relations. He has written India, China, and the World, A Connected History. He has co-authored A Traditional China in Asian and World History, and he's also, of course, the former founding head of the Nalanda Srivijaya, a program that was based here in Singapore for some time, out of which, of course, this professorship emerges. He is joined by two commentators, again from the NUS family, Professor Selina Ho and Rona Joy Sen, Dr. Rona Joy Sen. Selina is Associate Professor at the 𝗹𝗵𝗋 School of Public Policy, where she's also co-director of the Center on Asia and Globalization at NUS. She's written several books as well, really interesting stuff if you haven't seen it already. Thirsty Cities, Social Contracts and Public Goods Provision in China and India. Rivers of Iron, great titles, by the way. Railroads and Chinese Power in Southeast Asia, which came out recently. And she's also recently edited a handbook of China-India relations as well. She's joined by Rona Joy Sen, who's a senior research fellow and research lead of both the Institute of South Asian Studies and NUS's FAS's South Asian Studies program. He has written several works, House of the People, Parliament and the Making of Indian Democracy. And one of the books that I'm actually really interested in reading is Nation at Play, A History of Sport in India. And he's also worked, again, on comparative work as well, with a volume entitled Media at Work in China and in India. So we have a really great lineup for you. Not only Tan Sen, but of course colleagues who will be able to comment on his presentation, all thinking about this exciting moment, about thinking about how should we look at the relationships between these two countries, these two civilizations, these two important areas for the region. Again, we will have about a half an hour to 40 minutes for you, Tan Sen, and then we'll have some time for questions from the panel as well as from the audience. But for now, please join me in welcoming Professor Tan Sen.
𝗵𝗲 has cards, so I have to keep track of how much time I'm using. So I'll have my phone on here. Just a second. Okay. Thank you, 𝗵𝗲. Thank you, Tim, for introducing me. And it's great to be back, especially at this stage. My first public lecture in Singapore was actually here. Then I spoke about why Buddhism and not Hinduism succeeded in China. And I had to give two lectures because the room was full the first time. But I enjoy coming back here. Actually, almost 20 years ago, in July 2007, I came to Singapore for the first time to attend the inaugural meeting of the Nalanda Mentor Group, hosted by Singapore Ministry of Foreign Affairs. As the youngest member of that group, I was already 40. You can think about others in that group. I had extraordinary privilege of working alongside Professors Amrita Sen, Professor Wang Kung-woo, and Professor Sugata Bose, as well as Mr. George Yeo, then Foreign Minister of Singapore. During that visit, I also had the opportunity to view an illuminating exhibition on Nalanda at the Asian Civilization Museum. That exhibition has not been repeated again, unfortunately, but that was the most interesting and important exhibition on Nalanda. The experience of viewing that exhibition has left a lasting impression on me. A few months later, I returned to Singapore for a conference entitled Early Indian Influences in Southeast Asia, Reflections on Cross-Cultural Movements, organized by the Institute of Southeast Asian Studies under the leadership of Ambassador K. Kesavapani. Unfortunately, he couldn't make it today. These early visits marked the beginning of what has become a long-standing and deeply meaningful relationship with Singapore, the ACM, and ICES. As some of you know, and 𝗵𝗲 mentioned this, I later served as the director of the Nalanda Srivijaya Center at ICES, during which time we collaborated with the Asia Research Institute, ARI, and the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy on a range of activities and initiatives. This included programs on India-China relations, a series of lectures by Amitabh Ghosh, His IBIS trilogy had just come out at that point, and track 2 dialogues on mutual media perceptions between India and China, which were very successful, and the Indian government really took over that from us. It is truly a privilege to be here again today among familiar institutions and cherished colleagues with whom I have forged enduring friendship and intellectual bonds. Mentors and advisors such as Mr. 𝗏𝗏𝗀, Professor Wang-Kung-woo, and Ambassador 𝗓𝗏𝗏𝗀 have provided the vision and support essential to the creation of new academic centers and the advancement of cross-regional scholarship as we are doing again today. Friends in Singapore, Clement On, I don't know if he is here or not, whom I have known since his early days at the ACM, Selina Ho, whom I first met during her postdoctoral fellowship at NYU Shanghai, and is perhaps one of the people I have followed her career throughout, and I have very high expectations moving forward now that she has tenure here at NUS. Ronojoy Sen, arguably one of the most outstanding scholars of South Asia in Singapore. Thank you, Ronojoy. Matthew Ong Tuen and Tim Bunnell, who have worked tirelessly to establish the Nalanda Endowed Professorship in India-China Studies. All of them have made each of my visits to Singapore both intellectually enriching and personally meaningful. Thank you, everybody. I must also acknowledge members of the audience, some of whom have attended my previous talks in Singapore, 𝗵𝗲𝗰𝗁 being one of them, Professor Kwar-Tung Kwan, Ken Dean. Both of them have been great mentors and supporters. Puneet and Sukanya have made my visit every time feel at home, so thank you all of you for welcoming me back to Singapore. This present occasion, too, is a continuation of the journey that began 18 years ago with the first meeting of the Nalanda Mentor Group. I'm deeply honored to be delivering this lecture as part of the ARI Train series. I thank you all for your generous invitation and coming to this lecture today. I believe we now stand at the threshold of a new and significant chapter in the study of Asia. One that promises to reshape how we understand cross-cultural interactions, the movement of people, ideas, objects, and the ways in which nations foster collaboration, navigate disruptions, and respond to shared economic and environmental challenges. For the visionary initiative of establishing the Nalanda Endowed Professorship in India-China Studies at this pivotal moment, I wish to express my deepest gratitude to the trustees of the Singapore Nalanda Library Fund, Professor Wang-Kung-woo, Mr. 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗀𝗏𝗏, and Mr. 𝗏𝗏𝗀𝗀𝗀. As Mr. 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏 so eloquently stated at the gift ceremony earlier this month, the endowment will make a modest, I'm quoting him, make a modest but significant contribution to the region and the world. I wholeheartedly support this vision, and I'm truly honored to be part of this unfolding endeavor. Thank you, Mr. Yo. My objective today is to foreground the field of India-China studies and to articulate its significance in understanding historical challenges, exchanges, contemporary relations, and future possibilities. If you have attended my talk previously, this is quite different. It will be more academic than what I have done previously. So as a historian, I'm going to begin with the future, which is something we are advised not to do as historians. In an article I encountered last week in the New York Times, India and China were situated within the current geopolitical context. The article posed a provocative question: is India ready to capitalize on the deteriorating relations between the United States and the People's Republic of China? This question of readiness has historical antecedents and highlights the enduring significance of India-China interactions within a broader framework of transregional connectivities. Consider, for instance, the Qing-Gurkha War of the late 18th century. During this campaign in the borderlands of Tibet and Nepal, and I think there's a postdoc from ARI working on Nepal and China, the Qing general Fuan Khan became increasingly aware of the East East India Company's expanding colonial presence in South Asia, a presence that he then linked to the British activities along the Qing Empire's southern coast. This heightened awareness of the broader geopolitical connections between the Himalayas and South China Sea prompted the Qing authorities, particularly those stationed in the frontier provinces of Sichuan and Yunnan, to evaluate the potential threat posed by the British colonial expansion into Qing territory. It raised a critical question: was the Qing Empire adequately prepared to confront the ambitions of the European colonial expanding powers? This query led to several exploratory missions from Qing China to the British India, notably including the cartographer 𝗵𝗲𝗧𝗏 and the renowned intellectual Káng Youwei. Káng, a prominent figure in late Qing reform movement, reframed the question of readiness, pondering instead whether Qing China could learn from India's struggles to institute a more effective system of governance. These two are recent publications that you see, one on 𝗵𝗲𝗧𝗏, whose travels into India during British colonial period in the late 19th century is really fabulous. He is quite impressed with what he sees in India, and instead of criticizing the British, is very appreciative of the British about how they brought in electricity and other things. And then instead of telling what the threat that the British may have posed to the Qing Empire, said that perhaps we should learn from British India. And then he got criticized for that. Káng Youwei, on the other hand, is an interesting figure. His reforms failed, and he was being pursued, and then he escaped. He came to Southeast Asia and then went to Darjeeling, and he lived in Darjeeling and wrote this very famous book of his, and in that he was very critical of India, saying that Indians have not been able to be successful because of regional autonomy that was given, and he was writing to his student Liang Qishao, saying that that kind of regional autonomy that emphasizes local languages and local cultures is not what the Qing really needs. Several centuries earlier, during the 10th century, South Asian Buddhist monks began undertaking pilgrimage to Mount Wutai in China, symbolically affirming, as I have argued in this book that Maitri mentioned, Buddhism, Diplomacy, and Trade, China's emergence as a central realm of Buddhism. A Sanskrit Kotani's phrasebook meant for these South Asian traveling monks, discovered in Dunhuang, really talks about another set of questions about readiness during this period. This is about 10th century. Were Indian monks adequately prepared to travel to China? Did they possess the necessary linguistic skills to communicate in languages of the territories they were passing through? This document is actually quite interesting. On the reverse side, which was the main side, it's a diplomatic letter from Khotan to Dunhuang. And since paper is not easily available in Dunhuang, the reverse side was used to create these phases. These are phases in Sanskrit and Khotanese about learning the things that you would need as you are traveling. So these simple questions in two languages, right? And where are you going to? I'm going to China. What is your business in China? I want to go and see the Bodhisattva Manjushri. The thing doesn't show up properly here. I don't know. But it has another phrase that is quite interesting. I don't know why it was included. Do not stay there long in China. It is an unpleasant thing. But for me, what is quite interesting is the text then emphasizes the learning of language. This reminded me when the other Chinese monk Yi was going to India in the 7th century. He stopped by in Sumatra, in Palembang. And he said that anybody going to India should stop in Palembang and learn Sanskrit. Right? Also traveling monk, also learning a language. I think this is quite an important part. Are you ready to actually go to India? And then in this episode is, are you ready to go to China? Even though it's not a nice place, this says. Now, to me, this question of readiness is both compelling and motivational. It serves as an impetus to examine the global relevance of India-China interactions, analyze the influence and role of third parties and regions. Now, I should stop here and point out this issue about third parties and regions. So all this time I've been working on India and China, I realized that you really can't do India and China without doing a third part. So, for example, if you do India, China, Indonesia also becomes quite important. Places that are Japan in one side, Iran on the other side, are quite important to better understand. And this is one of my key arguments that I made in my second book, that the world matters in India, China, and you can't do India, China without looking at other parts of the world, especially in many cases, I would say other third world countries. There's a very interesting book coming out which compares India, China, and Brazil about urbanization, which I think will be bringing this person here. But it's also about exploring interconnected history and comparative narratives and understand the processes of knowledge circulations. So all these three things that I showed, I think are quite important. Being ready is about looking at wider issues, and for me that is a nice trope to go on. Allow me to now pose 4 pertinent questions regarding the endowed position being established at the National University of Singapore. So the main question is, what is this India-China studies? Why should we actually spend time engaging in India-China studies? How should we, or perhaps should not, approach India-China studies? And why is Singapore significant? Why do it here, right? So in my talk, I will try to answer these questions. You tell me if I'm successful or not. But what is this India-China studies? Now, at the outset, it is essential to clarify that India-China studies is neither India studies conducted in China nor China studies conducted in India. These later disciplines, India or South Asia studies and China studies or sinology, are established fields with their distinct methodological and research paradigms. In contrast, India-China studies require thoughtful consideration to define clearly its scope, its methodological foundations, and the analytical frameworks most suitable for its scholarly inquiry. Some have credited and others criticized me for inventing the field of India-China studies. I make up the field of India-China studies. But allow me to clarify today, and perhaps you should take a note, that I did not invent the field. The credit rightly belongs to Alexander von స్థాళ్-Holsten, a Russian-Estonian scholar trained in Sanskrit at the University of Halle in Germany. In 1922, స్థాళ్-Holsten became the first instructor of Sanskrit in Peking University, then known as Yenching University. In 1927, with funding from EFEO, a French institution, he founded the Sino-Indian Institute, subsequently integrated into the Harvard Yenching Institute in 1929 and relocated to Cambridge, Massachusetts. It still exists. Harvard Yenching Institute still emphasizes the study of China and India, so perhaps that is one of the places this endowed chair could collaborate with. The Institute's primary objectives, and this is really fascinating, 1920s, 1930s, Holsten is doing this, conducting research on Buddhist philology, linguistics, cultural relics, and Tibetan Buddhist iconography through comparative studies of Sanskrit, Tibetan, and Chinese Buddhist texts, again, different languages. Providing academic training and guidance for American students sponsored by the Harvard Yenching Institute to study in China. Serving as a cultural center, fostering collaboration between China and other nations in Oriental studies. That word is never used anymore. Publishing research, and this is what I find quite, this you see here, one of the first publications on India-China called the Harvard Sino-Indian Studies, where Buddhist texts translated into Chinese were then sometimes retranslated into Sanskrit or English and became one of the major ways in which that historical links between India and China through Buddhism was then being propagated. Then also, very interestingly, introducing modern Indian and Chinese philology into Chinese scholarship. A fascinating way in which intra-Asia connections in 1920s and 1930s worked through that institution. Several scholars affiliated with Sino-Indian Institute later played crucial role in developing 𝗔𝗵𝗶𝗀 in Shantiniketan. Established in 1937 by Thaiyun Shan under the guidance of Rabindranath Tagore, 𝗔𝗵𝗶𝗀 significantly advanced India-China studies during the 1940s and 1950s through influential journals. These are two very interesting journals serving different audiences. On the right is a journal founded by 𝗵𝗍 𝗵𝗍, which was very much academic, scholastic study of China, India, continuing what Holstein had done before that. On the left is a journal founded by Thaiyun Shan, which was more about celebrating India-China. And you'll see there are things written by Jawaharlal Nehru, K.D. Mohan Sen, Amartya Sen's grandfather, and other figures. So two journals that came up in 1940s and 1950s. Two very important books that looked at the history of India-China relations, one by 𝗵𝗍 𝗵𝗍. 𝗵𝗍 𝗵𝗍 was trained in France. Sullivan Levy was his teacher, came back and was one of the major figures in 𝗔𝗵𝗶𝗀, became the vice chancellor of Vishwabharati. And then by another scholar who had studied in 𝗔𝗵𝗶𝗀, 𝗔𝗕𝗏, who wrote perhaps one of the important takes on India-China connections in the ancient period. The field of India-China studies or Sino-Indian studies, also termed Sino-Indology, was firmly established by the mid-20th century. Initially, scholarship primarily focused on Buddhism and pre-colonial interactions, but however, from the mid-20th century, some of these will be familiar to you. 1962 war became the key theme. So it's the second half of the 20th century, war and politics started dominating. These are some of the books about 1962 war. Maxwell's book is quite well known, but I don't know about the other side of that. And you see there's a play on who started the war was the issue. It still continues to be a problem. There are a couple of books that are quite interesting. I really like this book called Shadow States. This is how during this conflict period, local people in Arunachal Pradesh negotiated with both states, China and India. It's a fascinating study of archival documents from Assam and Arunachal. I would highly recommend this Shadow States as a way to look at the period of war, not just fight between two nations, but what happened to the local people who encountered the war and how they dealt with the nation states. This is written by somebody who is at SOAS. Contemporary bilateral relations, rivalry, all this is that's a term that's used very often. I recommend another book, that one, Thirsty Cities, by Selina Ho. It's perhaps one of the most important comparative studies. Comparison is not easy to do. The middle one is also quite interesting, just came out. It's about class and inequality in India and China. That is focused on economy. Selina deals with more political science. She can talk more about it. There are historical connection books. Professor Chi Hsien-Lin, leading scholar at Peking University, wrote this fascinating collection of his writings. There's one book by Cao Yin, who was an NUS graduate, who wrote about the Sikhs in Shanghai. And then the other side is a very fascinating book about how India was imagined by the Chinese. It's a collection of articles, quite an important publication. Both these scholars who edited the volume are the leading scholars of Buddhism. More recently, we have fiction, we have travelogues. 𝗵𝗵𝗶𝗀 𝗧𝗵𝗏, Ibis Trilogy, I recommend that. But if you have not read Romila Thapar's She Went, Romila Thapar, as many of you know, is a leading historian of India. She did travel to China as an intern in 1957, and this is about her travels to China in the 1950s. She mentions playing table tennis and other things. Yoga, if you are interested in, is a fascinating take, and many of these travelogues by the Chinese are by single women traveling in India, which is again a very fascinating issue that perhaps we need to look into. Methodologically, juxtaposing China and India became a prevalent yet very problematic approach. I'll come back to that. Recently, scholarly innovations have emerged through decentering strategies involving third regions, Africa for example, or critically questioning existing frameworks of connection. The middle work by 𝗷𝗵𝗶𝘀 is a very interesting take on what happens in the literature of India and China after the war, how the people writing stories, their perception changes. And of course, that's my book. I have to mention that. And that methodological discussion is something that I think is quite important to understand. So, what is this this India-China studies, given all these examples that I just mentioned? So, this is my explanation of what I understand by India-China studies. It is a field that includes trans-regional and comparative studies that either center upon or decenter India-China. So, it doesn't have to just center on India-China. It is situated within broader intra-Asian, cross-cultural, and global processes, and it draws on both disciplinary and interdisciplinary approaches to analyze connections, disconnections, exchanges, impacts, disputes, circulations, and imaginations involving the two regions, India and China. Nevertheless, significant methodological concerns persist in scholarship that pairs India and China. Common issues include the absence of coherent methodological frameworks, speculative analysis, outdated application of nation-state paradigms, and tendencies towards either nationalist or celebratory rather than critically analytical narratives that are some of the problems of the field that I should also highlight. Next, why should we actually talk about India-China? A fundamental question: why pair India and China together? My position is that pairing these two regions reveals insights beyond bilateral relationship alone. As articulated in some of the recent scholarship, this is the book that Selina was involved in editing. I have a chapter in this. The editors, including 𝗵𝗵𝗶𝘀, who I don't think is here, points out the relationship between China and India is widely regarded. This is the reason why they are mentioning this handbook is necessary. Okay? The relationship between India and China is widely regarded as one of the central pivots of world politics. I agree. While China-US relation will be determinative of global security, global governance, and even global prosperity, the interactions between the two Asian giants could well become the second most consequential bilateral relationship in international politics. Let me get some water. Do you agree with that, Selina? I knew it. Thank you. Even a book that deals with history points out the 2015 United Nations Climate Change Summit offered compelling evidence of what so many other global indicators, from stock market shifts to security threats to trends to popular culture, have long suggested to attentive observers. China and India have become decisive players in determining the world's future. That the influence of China and India is on the rise is not news. It's news these days. Of course, their entry into the world stage has been on the radar of politicians, business leaders, scholars, journalists, and others for several decades. Shelley Pollack, who is one of the editors, is a leading scholar of India and Southeast Asia. He wrote this book on language of gods. Benjamin Ellman is a famous scholar of Chinese history. Now, if you have seen the flyer from ARI, I had this picture. I wanted to argue that the pairing of India and China has deeper historical antecedents. The Persian scholar Rashid al-Din in the 14th century situated the mountains of Tibet and India, that's how this picture is called, within his comprehensive historical works, considered to be the first world history work. Jami al-Tawarikh is a compendium of chronicles, which notably includes a biography of the Buddha, likely introduced to Persia via Kashmir and Tibetan intermediaries. So he's pointing out, geographical knowledge in the 13th, 14th century in Persia is quite fascinating. And I'll just point out on the left side is a Chinese female wearing a Chinese dress. I don't know if you can see the feet, It's a small feat that she has. On the right is an Indian woman wearing a sari. And I'll come back to this, the lack of studies on feminism or women in India, China is something missing, and I would encourage you to look into this, why this Rashid al-Din in Persia are depicting an Indian woman and a Chinese woman on the borders of India and China, not men. Right? But there's a man, which is Buddha. This biography of the Buddha is quite fascinating, that appears in Mongol Iran in the 14th century. How it got is perhaps through Kashmiri intermediaries, as I said. These are how the folios look like. It appeared in Persian first. This version is actually Arabic rendition of the Persian volume. On the other side of Asia, almost at the same time, the Japanese Buddhist communities in the same period envisioned India through the travel narratives of the Chinese monk Xuanzang, who journeyed to India during the 7th century and composed 𝗓𝗓 records of the western regions during the Great Tang dynasty. Despite not visiting India until the 17th century, the Japanese Buddhists created detailed images of Xuanzang's experiences at Nalanda and his interactions with King Harsha, as well as fascinating map of India that marked the sites of a Chinese monk visited. Here on the right is Xuanzang meeting his teacher in Nalanda. On the left side is he is participating in a ceremony that Harsha had organized. Both of these were mentioned in his travelogue. And this is the map, the fascinating map the Japanese created in the 14th century, marking, you can see it perhaps closely in red, the places that Xuanzang visited, and then how India is divided on the left. You can see that. Another noteworthy historical episode pertains to maritime connections, exemplified by the Chola naval expeditions to Srivijaya in 1025. The significance of this event, discussed in the 2007 conference in Singapore that Ambassador Pani had organized, highlights Srivijaya's interference in direct commercial engagement between Cholas and Sung China, making the first major naval operation across the Bay of Bengal. This episode is considered to have significantly transformed maritime trade between coastal regions of India and China. This is a conference volume that came out, and I was arguing there how perhaps Srivijaya was trying to interfere in the relations between Chola and Sung China. India-China's global connectivity intensified during the colonial period, exemplified by trade in tea and opium and the movement of endangered labor. Linking these regions through complex and often troubling networks that included endangered labor as well. The American-built clipper Frolic, constructed in Baltimore during the mid-19th century, illustrates this global connectivities. Initially utilized in the opium trade between Bombay and Canton, the Frolic ultimately participated in the California gold rush, symbolizing its extensive global entanglements. It later sank near San Francisco with rich cargo of Chinese ceramics. If you plot on the global map the construction of Frolic in Baltimore, moving to Bombay, and moving between Bombay and Canton, and ultimately ending up in San Francisco. It's a history of this very interesting connectivity that existed during the colonial period. Finally, the Pan-Asianist vision articulated by Okakura Kakuzo at the turn of the 20th century, despite its inherent limitations and later associations with Japanese imperialism, significantly influenced prominent figures such as Rabindranath Tagore, Sun Yat-sen, and Jawaharlal Nehru. Its anti-colonial vision notably contributed to the Bandung Conference, which united Asian and African nations amid decolonization movements. These historical instances, ranging from imaginative pairing of China and India to the notion of connection without connection, this is what I call the Japanese thinking about India through Xuanzang, the significance of premodern cross-regional warfare and commercial rivalries, the expansive global entanglements of the colonial period, and the emergence of anti-colonial solidarities underscore the diverse and compelling justification for engaging in India and China studies beyond the confines of contemporary geopolitics and economic imperatives. These justifications can be summarized as following. The India-China pairing provides unique intra-Asian and global perspectives essential for reinterpreting historical and contemporary dynamics. We can ponder on this. The Buddhist connections are quite important. The commercial connections during the colonial period, very important. Of course, the border issue of the contemporary times, also very, very important. It also sheds light on the transmission of Buddhist ideas, terrestrial and maritime interactions, and resistance against European hegemony by Asian and African actors in formulating alternative political imaginaries. Studying India and China facilitates critical examination of contemporary geopolitical alignments, economic models, social challenges, and global anxieties concerning climate change and geopolitical fragmentation. I think it also encourages innovative methodological and conceptual explorations with interdisciplinary scholarship, which is, I think, quite important to understand. Now, this is the third part, and I'll try to wrap up very quickly. Moving beyond comfort zones, you're 5 minutes, good. Few years ago, my colleague at NYU, 𝗓𝗵𝗶𝗀 𝗔𝗕𝗦𝗧𝗥𝗔𝗖𝗧, and I co-edited a special issue on methodologies in China-India studies for the International Journal of Asian Studies. This special issue features 7 contributions by scholars from diverse disciplinary backgrounds, all actively engaged in the study of India and China. In our introductory essay, we advocated for a nuanced, historically informed, interdisciplinary, and self-reflective approach to studying China and India together. We argued for moving beyond simplistic comparisons and nationalist frameworks to instead explore the integrate dynamics of connections, disconnections, shared challenges, and divergent responses at multiple analytical levels, both within and beyond national boundaries. Regarding comparative studies of India and China, we concurred with Prasenjit Dwara and Elizabeth Perry's conception of convergent comparison, which critiques methodological nationalism and approach predominantly viewing the nation state and its internal processes as the primary drivers of historical change. Instead, convergent comparison acknowledges that internal developments within nations are equally shaped by global circulatory forces and subnational currents. Subnational currents and beyond nations are quite the important things. Conversely, we express caution regarding studies that merely juxtapose India and China. Such works often present separate analysis of India and China without providing integrative comparative frameworks, thus leaving readers to independently discern the rationale and significance of the comparison. In these studies, the act of pairing takes precedence over the quality of the contributions. This is a book that I really don't like. Not because this 𝗬𝗓𝗋 is a very famous scholar of Chinese philosophy, and he points out, the title is quite revealing, the story of IR fiasco, and Selina can speak more about it. The results were disappointing. I'm not writing this. This guy is writing. 𝗬𝗓𝗋 is writing it. The IR focus of the volume was not particularly fitting, looking at the ancient Chinese and Indian philosophies. One Chinese scholar writing about Chinese philosophy, one Indian scholar writing about Indian philosophy, and it's left to all of us to figure out what is being compared. Scholars engaging in India-China studies through juxtaposing therefore often lack the necessary preparation for meaningful comparative analysis. Effective engagement in India-China studies ideally requires scholars to demonstrate robust knowledge of both India and China, as well as their broader global entanglements, possess proficiency in relevant language, and critically engage with primary sources and existing scholarly literature, be well versed in key concepts, theories, and methodological relevant to translational and comparative studies, avoid imposing nation-state paradigms on historical episodes, and refrain from forcing comparison where meaningful parallels do not exist, clearly differentiate between rigorous scholarly research and forms of public commentary such as op-eds. That has become a tradition in India, unfortunately. These are by no means easy requirements, given the complexity of the two regions and societies involved, each with its own long and intricate historical traditions. distinct linguistic systems, and diverse political structures, the training demanded, the research undertaken, and the scholarship produced all call for exceptional resolve and sustained commitment. Another concern in India-China studies is the field's overwhelming male-centric orientation in terms of research themes. There remains a notable absence of studies examining exchanges, encounters, and comparisons involving Indian and Chinese women. Instead, indeed, an in-depth analysis of Indira Gandhi's role in India-China relations, for instance, remained unexplored. Similarly deserving scholarly attention is the narrative of a female elephant named Asha, Hope, gifted by the Indian Prime Minister Nehru to the children of China in 1953. This is the figure that you show in the opening slide. What studying? How do you take an elephant from India to China? It's a very interesting process. Some challenges, some colleagues and I are currently involved in developing a comprehensive database of China-India studies, incorporating new archival material from India, China, and other regions. It is my hope that the endowed professorship in India-China studies will significantly contribute to cultivating much as Sino-Indian Institute and China Bhavan once did, a new generation of scholars equipped with necessary skills, determination, and intellectual insight to engage in this important field. I end with why Singapore and Maitri. This is the last part. I conclude this evening's talk by addressing the question, why is Singapore a significant location for India-China studies? When I first visited Singapore in 2007, I was particularly struck by the series of sculptures situated around the Singapore River just outside here, notably the two series entitled From Chettiars to Financiers and the River Merchants. These sculptures vividly embody what Mr. Giorgio described during the gift ceremony as the convergence of Indian and Chinese mandalas in Singapore. I don't know if you have seen his lecture. I encourage you to do that. There's a YouTube video about that. The convergence was also articulated by the famous Indian Ocean historian K.N. Chaudhary and the world system scholar Janet Abdul-Lughod. While Singapore's contemporary role in India-China diplomatic and economic interactions is well acknowledged, it is equally important to recognize the historical contribution of earlier generation of Singaporeans to the cultural exchanges between these two regions. One notable figure in this regard is Lee Chun Seng. I don't know how many of you know him. A philanthropist pivotal in establishing the Singapore Buddhist Lodge and the Po Ain Si Temple here in Singapore. In December 1940, the Indian Nobel laureate Rabindranath Tagore, and this is not known by many scholars that Tagore had actually written to Lee Chun Seng, wrote to Lee expressing gratitude for Lee's book and for Lee's planned support in adding a research hall to China Bhavan. The book mentioned by Tagore was Lee's travelogue, Pilgrimage to India, the Land of Buddha, as he writes in English. Aside from being a compelling yet underexplored narrative, the travelogue contains valuable illustrations, including a portrait by the renowned Chinese artist Xu Beihong, and a photograph of the foundational stone laying ceremony for the Chinese Buddhist temple in Sarnath. This travelogue also features a preface by Tagore and an address by Lee, who financed the restoration of the temple, reputedly originating in the Tang dynasty. Very few studies have been done on this travelogue, and I encourage people in Singapore to look into this. In 2011, I visited the Chinese temple in Sarnath with Mr. Yo, who was already contemplating the convergence of Indian and Chinese mandalas way back then. Through the generous endowment to the National University of Singapore, Mr. Yo has now effectively ensured that these mandalas intersect in Singapore and facilitate the development of an important field of study. Let me conclude by circling back to the issue of readiness. I refer to another recent article published in the United States, which underscored India's growing proximity to China amid current geopolitical uncertainties, and another article from Indian newspaper that hinted at possible collaboration between Indian and Chinese, I don't know why Indi, students in addressing common area of concern in the United States. This moment indeed represents a pivotal juncture to engage in rigorous scholarship on India and China within a global context. However, we must ask ourselves whether we possess the necessary research and analytical capabilities. Are we adequately prepared to study and critically evaluate this new era? Can we situate our analysis of India and China within broader geographical and historical context to better comprehend their past interactions and recent developments? Can we contribute to realizing, as the Chinese government, sorry if I quote them, I think it's quite applicable these days, a community with shared future for mankind? Through the study of India and China and their impact on environment, ecology, and Asian and global peace, I firmly believe that Singapore is uniquely positioned to support and advance the scholarly pursuits of this important academic field, particularly by nurturing a new generation of researchers shaped by the rich confluence of India and China mandalas. I look forward with great anticipation to the outcome and contributions of this exciting new India-China initiative in Singapore, which holds the potential to significantly shape the field of China-India studies in the decades to come. Thank you.